interviewer is Timothy Brooks, accompanied by Abby Meyer, Frank Schneegus, and Chloe Chan. This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. So to start out, can we go back over and go over where and when you were born and a few things about your family?
I was born in Klamath Falls, Oregon in 1939. Family, my mother, who's now deceased, I have one brother, and that's about the extent of my family.
So only the one sibling?
Yeah.
Did he serve or have any relations with the military?
No, he was never in the service.
What sort of job did he have?
He was an accountant.
He was an accountant. What sort of job or anything did you have before enlisting in the military?
I was in school.
Just in school?
Yeah.
Enlisted straight out of high school?
Yeah. Worked in the fields during the summer.
How did you enter the service?
I enlisted in the Air Force in October 1956.
Why did you choose to enlist in the Air Force?
Well, I wanted to go in the military, and one of my uncles that had been in the war during World War II recommended the Air Force because they had better educational opportunities.
When did you depart for training camp?
The day I enlisted. It was October 26th of 1956.
And how was that?
It was rough, but it wasn't real bad because I'd been used to working hard. So.
Did you have any specialized training for the military?
I was in electronics and a few other things. Then I ended up as the last 6 years of my career, I was a gunner on B-52s.
How was sort of adapting to military life?
It wasn't real hard. Military has just a different way of living, but you got to be able to put up with the conditioning, the discipline, all that. But I grew up in a disciplined family, and it wasn't a hard adjustment.
And where did you serve?
Quite a few places. Texas, Illinois, back in Texas again, a little bit of time in Oklahoma, over in France for 2 years, back mainly in Texas for a long time, and then Vietnam. Then they sent me to New York, and then I went back to Vietnam and spent 2 more years, and came back. They sent me to Wyoming, and then I put in for retraining and came out here to Beale.
So what were the trips abroad like? What did you do?
As far as my job, it was just electronics maintenance. When I was in France, did a little bit of touring, went to Belgium, Luxembourg, went and saw Paris, was right on the German border for a little while. In Vietnam, was on 2 different bases, Cam Ranh Bay and then Tan Son Nhut, which was right in Saigon.
Did you see any action during your time there?
Oh yeah. I was there for the Tet Offensive in 1968, and then we got attacked again pretty heavily in May of '68 and again in June.
What was that like?
Frightening. Definitely frightening.
Did you actively participate in any of the fighting?
No, I had a weapon with me on one of the occasions. I wasn't able to shoot because our security people were between me and the enemy.
What other sorts of emotions were present during the combat experiences?
I don't know of any others, just you're scared to death.
What sort of destruction, if any, happened to the bases you were at?
Well, mortar attacks created some damage. We had one incident where the shop that I worked in was on the end of a hangar, and we had a T-39 aircraft parked in the hangar, and it got hit by a 122 millimeter rocket, and the camera repair shop was upstairs, and we had a tech rep up there, a civilian tech rep that was running down the stairs to try to get away, and the shrapnel killed him.
So to go back a little bit, what exactly was the job that you performed for the military, and did you receive any sort of specialized training for that?
Yeah, I went through tech school in Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, and then occasional updates when they came out with new equipment. It was all electronics. Went through working on, and learned to work on aircraft radio equipment and navigation equipment.
Did you form any really good friendships while you were overseas?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's a brotherhood, and you develop a lot of good friendships while you're there. You tend to lose contact after you get home. You move around. And then when you get up to my age, you've lost a lot of them.
Did you stay in touch with your friends and family back home?
I stayed in touch with my family when I was gone. I've lost contact. I only have contact with one of my high school friends right now.
What sort of role did you play after the Tet Offensive? Did you go into the bomber?
No, I was still working in maintenance when they hit the Tet Offensive, working on aircraft, electronics equipment, and as soon as everything settled down, we just went in and went to work.
Repairing from the attack?
Well, I didn't have much repair work to do. It was just make sure that we could get aircraft off the ground and then recover them when they came back.
Did you earn any special service awards or medals while you were overseas?
I've got 3 air medals and 3 commendation medals.
And how did you earn those?
The air medals was when I was flying on B-52s, doing the missions over Vietnam, and the commendations medals were partly for that, and also for just doing the job that I did when I was over there in Vietnam.
So you mentioned that you served 2 tours while in Vietnam. Do you know why they sent you back?
I volunteered.
Volunteered.
I came back to the States and went through, I didn't like where they stationed me to start with, and I went through a divorce, and I didn't have anything to stay in the States for, so I volunteered and went back.
Were there any major tragedies or other battles besides the few you've already listed that were of any importance?
After I became a gunner on the B-52s, went back and was flying bombing missions from April 72 until the end of the conflict in 73. December 72, a lot of people refer to as the Christmas raids. We were flying over Hanoi. I did 3 missions over Hanoi, and I lost some good friends and some other acquaintances that flew along with us. I go back to the Vietnam Wall now, and there's about 65 to 70 people on there that we flew with.
What sort of role did you play as a gunner on the B-52, and what was that like?
Hours and hours of sheer boredom interrupted by moments of stark terror. If you're going over and they're launching what we referred to as telephone poles, the SAM-7 missiles, they would. That's what we lost any of our guys to, the aircraft that were shot down. They were all done by SAM-7s. The MiGs, the first night we went over Hanoi, they came up. They decided they didn't like the 450 caliber machine guns that we had on our tail. They lost 3 other aircraft when they came after us, and they didn't get any of us, so they wouldn't come up on us anymore.
Are there any war stories or stories that you remember from your time serving?
There are quite a few war stories that I can recall, but they're not real good memories, and I don't like to talk about them.
Did you have any time off while you were overseas to relax for a few days, or?
Not to relax for a few days. I did, because I extended over there twice on my second time. They would give me a 30-day free leave, and I'd come back, visit the States, and relax a little bit, or try to. But when you do that, you've always got family saying, well, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And so I just kind of passed it off.
What sort of activities did you do when you came back to the States, just to relax?
You don't really want to know.
How were your interactions with the soldiers or even the locals overseas?
Pretty good. Well, of course, my wife's from Vietnam. Yeah, I met her shortly after I got over there on my second run, and we got married 2 years later, just before I was ready to leave over there.
Were you ever captured and made a prisoner of war?
No. Had some friends that were.
What did you do after the war ended?
Well, I continued in the Air Force until 1976. The war ended supposedly in 1973. And I was stationed here at Beale, did my normal job, and then got out and got into sales.
How was it readjusting to being back as a civilian?
A little bit different. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I got out. I sent out about 250 resumes and got one response, and by that time I had a job in car sales and enjoyed what I was doing, so I didn't take advantage of it.
Where were you when the announcement was made that the war was over?
On Guam.
And what was the reaction to that?
Well, the reaction to that was actually pretty good. We didn't quite figure it out because we didn't think it was really over.
Why was there sort of a delay between when the war officially ended and you returned home?
Well, I got sent home fairly soon after it ended. They decided we had to have physicals, flight physicals, and I had a blood problem. They sent me back to the States, medically grounded. Went through everything, cleared up, and then I got a medical waiver to put me back on flying status, and went back over with a different crew. Flew some training missions out of Guam at the time, and then came back in October '73.
What are a few things that you remember that the war kind of taught you that stuck with you for the rest of your life?
Persistence. You just got to keep going, and that applies to almost everything that you do in life.
What was the kind of atmosphere of Vietnam with the temperature and it being semi-tropical?
It's not semi-tropical, it's basically tropical. It's hot and humid. You can take a shower and go a mile and you need another one.
What sort of weapons were commonly used during the war?
Well, for what we had, mainly M16 rifles. Of course, then the aircraft were armed with all kinds of stuff. And when I was flying with the B-52s, it was all 500-pound bombs. And of course, my end of it was .450 caliber machine guns.
How many planes, if any, did you shoot down?
Done. Like I said, they wouldn't come near us afterward. Our guys got 3 of them.
During your breaks during this, when you came back to the States, how did the other American citizens treat the soldiers that were returning from the war?
At that time, the big conflict hadn't gotten going. There were times that things did happen. When I came back the first time, I got stationed up in Long Island, New York, and I went to church and got greeted very nicely when I was going into the church. When I came out, the priest told me that people were not comfortable since I'd been to Vietnam, so I didn't bother going back.
Did you try going to any other church or any services? Or
No.
Were there any other sort of lessons besides the persistence that you kind of got out of your service?
Just discipline and the persistence, that's basically it.
So you mentioned that you were the technician, you did a lot of the electrical things. What were some of the really common or exciting things that you got to do with that?
Well, the first tour over there, I got assigned to what we call base flight. It's aircraft that are used just for base purposes. I got assigned to work on their aircraft, and it was old C-47s, World War II type aircraft, and I would fly with them as a radio operator because I knew how to operate the HF, or high frequency radio. There was nobody else on the base that knew how to run it. I'd been trained in it. But other than that, there wasn't much special.
Did you enjoy what you were doing?
Oh yeah.
How was the U.S. military at kind of supporting the locals, or did they kind of overrun them?
No, we had a good relationship with most of the locals. Of course, in Vietnam, you didn't know exactly who was the enemy because they infiltrated right along with the rest of the people.
What was that like, the not knowing if someone was your friend or your enemy? Cause
you always had to keep watching.
If you knew sort of the experiences that you were going to have once you enlisted, would you still have enlisted?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it wouldn't have stopped me.
Have you maintained any contact really with the other veterans from the war, or gone to any veterans organization meetings or anything like that?
Oh yeah. Most of the people that I associate with around here are Vietnam veterans. And we have different groups. I belong to the VFW, the American Legion of Disabled American Veterans. I'm the treasurer for our local stand-down committee. And I'm also their representative for the United Veterans Council. So I stay busy with the veterans.
How many veterans live in this area? Is it a really populated area with a lot of veterans?
Yeah, we've got a lot. We've got a population here. Let's take Cuba City's got a population of about 60,000. Probably 2,500 of them at least are veterans. Of course, we have a lot of, like myself, retired Air Force because of Beale Air Force Base out here. And then we used to have 2 Air Force bases in the Sacramento area.
What were some of your favorite memories from your time in Vietnam?
Well, the favorite one is right over there, my wife. Actually, being able to, when I was going to Saigon, I enjoyed that. Used to go downtown on my day off, get my hair cut, and I could go in and get a haircut, a manicure, and tonic and massage for about $6.
When did you, and where did you meet your wife?
She worked for the Vietnamese Air Force on the base, and she was in the liaison office. And I had to go over there one day and met her and ask her to go out. She wouldn't go out with me because all Americans were married and looking for fun. So I had to send to the States and get my divorce papers to show it to her parents before she'd go out with me.
When did you guys get married?
In October 29th, 1969. And then I came to the States about 3 weeks later, and she followed me a week after that.
To go back kind of to how you adapted to the military life, what was kind of the social life, and how did the guys relate to each other?
Well, when you go in, there is no real social life. You are with your unit 24/7. You're being yelled at by your instructor, drill instructor, or training instructor constantly. They're on your case, but it's discipline. It's trying to teach you how to be military. You relate to the other people in your group. It's the Air Force. It's a flight. You relate to them because they're in the same situation that you are.
How was the food and sleeping conditions both in the States and overseas?
The food in the States was usually pretty good. First tour in Vietnam, the food was, well, they were just building a base and the food was terrible. We had get up in the morning and go to breakfast, and it was dried eggs. And then one morning they hollered and said, "Hey, they got fresh eggs in." So we all went running to the mess hall, and they started cracking the eggs, and they had been in shipment so long that the yolks were green. And when I was in Saigon, the food there was decent. If you went to the NCO club or the mess hall, it was okay. We took a lot of C rations because we didn't know where we were going to be or when we were going to be able to eat. C rations are not good. But we kept them and we ate them. I would eat a lot of times in town. As far as bedding, the old military cots that we had when I first enlisted were the old spring cots, and then they went to the bigger beds. We were back to the spring cots when I was at Cameron Bay, my first trip, and then when I got to Tan Son Nhut, Saigon, they didn't have room for all the people on the base, so they quartered me off base. I had to find an apartment. I had a little dinky one-room apartment. But I had a nice bed. Made sure of that.
What exactly are C rations?
It's an old type. They don't even exist anymore, but it's an old type of canned food that you could heat up if you had a Bunsen burner, or you could eat them cold, which was not great. You get, well, one of the things that people talk about was the lima beans and ham, and then you get a little can of fruit, and you usually get some crackers. Real good eating.
Was there anything that surprised you about when you arrived to Vietnam with regard to either how the war was going or what you were supposed to do?
My biggest surprise when I first got over there, like I mentioned, they were just Cam Ranh Bay, the base there was in the process of being built. And I walked into the orderly room, which was in a tent, and they had me sign in, and they told me, okay, you can stay in this tent tonight. Tomorrow you'll be on detail building your tent. And they had 10 of us living in an old 8-man army tent.
How big were the tents that you guys were staying in?
I don't know what the measurements were, but they were designed for 8 people for the army.
What was Cam Ranh Bay besides the army base?
It was, well, you had Air Force on one end, you had Army in the middle, and Navy at the other end, because it was a big area. It's a peninsula, and you got the bay out there, so the Navy was using the bay. Big sand pile. Bob Hope came over and did one of his shows, and he said, I don't know what you guys did, but this is the biggest sand trap I've ever seen.
Where was it located if you were looking at a map of Vietnam?
Probably about halfway between the tip of South Vietnam and the DMZ, which would have been the dividing line between North and South. Right on the coast.
So did you go into both South Vietnam and North Vietnam?
No, we could not. Our politicians would not let us cross the DMZ. The North Vietnamese could cross and come down and fight in the south, but we were not allowed to go to the north. In fact, in 1966, President Johnson stopped us from even bombing up there. We didn't get to bomb up there again until we went in Hanoi in 72.
Going back to talking about why you enlisted, sort of, was it to try and stop the spread of communism through the Vietnam, or was there some other reason?
No, in 1956, we had finished the war in Korea. We didn't have a war going on. I just enlisted to get out on my own and do things my way.
Was that kind of the general idea for a lot of the guys back then?
Yeah. Get out of school and go in the military.
And that, so kind of going on with that, that's one of the reasons I'm guessing that the bonds formed so easily, besides just the being thrown together for that training. Were there any other common reasons?
No, not really, because we had guys from all over the country. I had a guy from New York, one from Chicago, some from the South. Me being from Oregon, it was just totally different.
If you're okay with answering, was there any racial segregation with blacks and whites in the military?
There was no segregation when I went in. It had all been taken care of. They stopped that in 1947. Consolidated everything.
Even within the just kind of ranks of the soldiers between each other?
Well, there were conflicts, but I never had a problem because I never thought much about it.
So while you were over in Vietnam, were there any of the guys that would do stuff to relax for, even if it was just for a few hours, if they weren't doing anything, or was it all just going from one thing to the next?
Well, there were guys, you did things to relax. A lot of guys would go to town, drink, chase the girls. Just typical things.
Were there any combat situations with fighting against the South Vietnamese?
No. No, we were there to support the South Vietnamese. And
so if they had an issue, they would go up and fight with the North against everyone else.
my wife's brother was in the Vietnamese army in their Red Berets, which was their elite outfit.
Did you fight alongside with the South Vietnamese?
Our people did. I wasn't out in that, so I did work on a few of their airplanes.
What were the relations like between the different branches of the military?
Pretty good. The Army and the Marines appreciated the Air Force because we would come in and do airstrikes on the enemy.
So, what was the difference in the technology level between the U.S. and Vietnamese, especially in the aircraft?
Well, most of their aircraft were older, but again, we got them some updated things too. We brought them in some F-5s, which was a modification of the T-38. We flew some of those, and they flew some. But we furnished those to the South Vietnamese Air Force.
What kind of planes were those?
It was a little fighter, a small fighter. That's what F is for, is F, is fighter. And it was, like I said, it was a modified trainer that had been armed.
What about sort of the rest of the military technology, weapons, arms between the two sides?
Well, for a long time, the South Vietnamese were fighting with kind of antiquated old French weapons, but we brought them up to date with the M16s, some of the other weapons that we were using.
What about the North Vietnamese?
North Vietnamese were getting most of their weapons from China and Russia. Their primary weapon was the AK-47.
What did you know about sort of their relations, the North Vietnamese, with the communist China and Russia?
They had early on they had some good relations with China. They broke that off. They had some problems with China. Then they developed a relationship with Russia, and Russia was furnishing them a lot of weapons, in fact, including the surface-to-air missiles that were being fired at us when we were flying over there. At the end of the war, when the communists took over total Vietnam, they invited Russia to come in there and set up a couple of bases, and then that relationship broke down and they ran them out. Now, believe it or not, they're asking the United States, why don't you come back? Because of their conflict with China right across the sea.
What was some of the other common modes of transportation, whether just on land or by sea?
Well, for us, jeeps, tanks, that type of thing was the common, and trucks, big military trucks. But For the common Vietnamese person, small cars, taxis, what we called a sicalo, and they had two forms of a sicalo. One was pedaled, and the other one was a small motorcycle with a seat on the front.
Is there anything else you'd like to share about your experience serving in our country?
No, it was just a pleasure to get it, be able to do it, and now that I'm retired, I have been for a long time. I still miss it some of the time. When 9/11 happened, I tried to go back in, and they wouldn't let me. They said I was too old. And I didn't think so. That's about it for me. Unless you got something else.